So in this video we're going to talk about the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT, which is the first of 5 sections you'll encounter in the exam, and it's also going to be the first of the more specific tip videos that I'm going to cover in the UCAT. So the verbal reasoning section involves answering 44 questions in 21 minutes, which gives you about 30 seconds to answer each question. So in my verbal reasoning I got 590, which was my lowest score of the 5, but this is seen quite commonly throughout sort of all candidates that sit the UCAT. As far as it goes for me, I would say the reasoning for this is due to the fact that it's the first thing you encounter. So you'll sit down, press start on the test, and with myself anyway, I didn't really talk to myself before. I didn't really give myself the time to think that, okay, right, the exam is going to start now. Focus. I sort of did that midway through the test, which sort of resulted in me being a bit panicked throughout it, but I did manage to pull it through and get an alright score. I could have done a lot worse. So the verbal reasoning section essentially involves getting a chunk of text and being able to extract some information from it. The one good thing about the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT is the fact that there is no outside knowledge assumed. So everything you do need to know is in the block of text that you've got, and you will not be questioned on anything outside of this sort of extract. So in terms of techniques for the verbal reasoning section, there are a few techniques that you can use. As far as my study plan went, the main ones that I've seen were skim reading and sort of reading the entire block of text and answering some questions off of it. So skim reading involves essentially looking for an individual word in this big block of text, skim reading the entire thing really quickly so you're not wasting any time finding the word, and then looking one line up, one line down, and sort of extracting the information from that. That worked most of the time for me in terms of longer texts, and in terms of shorter text I was able to sort of quickly read the entire block and then answer the questions based on that. What I would say in terms of this is, do use this wisely. You don't really want to be reading an entire huge block of text about history and then realising you can't answer any of the questions on it because you've forgotten half of it already. The main thing to do is use this wisely. Skim read the huge text if you think you can take them, and sort of read the entire short blocks of text. So with these techniques in mind, the first and definitely the most important tip I would say is to pick your battles. So as I've previously mentioned, you're going to have huge big blocks of text and you're going to have tiny blocks of text. So to go into a bit more depth about that, a lot of the questions in the sort of shorter side of things will be true or falses. Actually they're called true, false, can't tells. So the main thing is you want to be answering every single one of these questions. I think I read while I was going through my study plan, even if you answer every other question wrong, as long as you get the true, false, can't tell questions right, you will actually end up with quite a decent score. I mean, not absolutely fantastic, but it is just important to know, even if you skip every other question and just get the true, false, negatives, you will get a substantial score. The main thing as well, which you will learn with time, which does come with consistency of studying, is take on what you can. So with me, for example, the things such as history, anything to do with war, anything to do with sort of like ancient Greek, Latin words, anything to do with sort of prehistoric kings, anything like that, skip. When I say skip in terms of these questions, I don't mean like have a skim through the text, have a skim through the answers, think you can't do it and skip it. I mean, as soon as you see anything to do with war, use the shortcuts and just move straight past it. There's no point in wasting time doing it. As I've said, your last 5 questions in the verbal reasoning could be a true, false, can't tell question, but you've wasted the last sort of 10 minutes trying to answer a question about like a Roman king. It's almost a no-brainer, but it did take me a really long time throughout my study to realise this. So another thing I would mention about the verbal reasoning section is, prior to the pressing start, do give yourself a sort of mental pep talk before you press start. And I cannot emphasise enough before you press start. In my exam, I had a sort of realisation halfway through that this was the real thing. This was essentially going to dictate the next year of my life, whether or not I applied or took a year out. And it took me about a minute to get out of this rut, which it was a pretty distracting sort of minute, and it took me about a minute of wasted time just to get back into the focus. And I would recommend, before you get into this, give yourself a pep talk, and ultimately it will save you a lot of time in the first section. The one other thing I would definitely say that was really important, but I did definitely take for granted in hindsight, was joining the UCAT Discord server. So there's a Discord server with people that are about to sit the UCAT that they all sort of participate in. They send questions, they send answers, they sort of send techniques. It's extremely helpful. It's growing every year. I think when I joined there was hundreds of people doing it, and it's a little community even up to the point of interviews, and people are sending the offers they got and people are sending the scores they got. It does definitely make studying a little bit easier when you realise that it's not just yourself going through this, because through the entire UCAT process, unless you have a sort of a full friendship group that are medics, that are applying medics, it will feel quite isolating. So I would definitely say, if not for study help, even to give yourself a sense of community, definitely join the Discord server. So one sort of final thing that I didn't really see throughout my UCAT study that did really help me a lot was, with everything I've said in mind in terms of the guess flag skipping, the lengthy questions, and in terms of the skim reading, there is one exception to things that you shouldn't really be skipping. There are extremely easy marks that I got in my exam that I saw repeatedly throughout my practice, and it was an easy mark. So the one exception is maths questions sort of hidden in the verbal reasoning section. And it sounds a lot scarier than it is. It's not difficult maths, it's basic subtraction, it's basic, like potentially basic addition. For example, in my exam I had, off the top of my head, it was something vaguely like this. It was King James was born in, say, like 1800. He was heir to the throne in, say, 1820, and then say he died in, say, 1830. It would essentially then ask you, how many years was he king for? 10. It's like one of these things that while you're skipping, maybe quickly glance at the questions to see if it's going to be an easy maths question, because I got one in my exam, easy marks, and it is one of these things that sort of, when going back over it at the end of the exam, you will be able to pick up on it quite easily. So one last thing I will mention is, what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to include my sort of raw notes, my immediate thoughts while going through the UCAT study for my verbal reasoning. I'm going to include this, I think I'll do it in a link sort of down below, and it's going to include the things that I was thinking throughout the study, even if it gives anybody sort of some solace that I was pretty much struggling with it prior to the exam. If you are as well, you're not going to be the only one. Or it might actually give some people tips, because I did sort of regurgitate some of my mental process at that point, so who knows, some people might find it interesting, some people not. Regardless, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will be releasing the next section very shortly.